So our show is Margins, and it's a really good overview of just demographics in contemporary society that are often marginalized, either for their gender, their race, their immigration status, ability, age, so many things that are very important to look at today, especially with what is happening with the pandemic, just seeing social groups get affected way more intensely than other groups, but also, of course, the social unrest that's happening regarding Black Lives Matter. So we do feel this show was not happening at a great time, but I'm just happy that we can have these conversations together today. So our artists that are going to be like talking about their work today is Carl Grauer, and he is located in Poughkeepsie, New York. And then our other speaker today will be Molly Haig, and right now she's in Vermont, but she was also based in Brooklyn pretty recently. So just quickly a little bit about Barrett, in case we have people here who don't quite know like what we are. So we are a historical home, which is now converted into an art center, and we have contemporary exhibitions that rotate. Let me just admit a few more people. And so we also have 2 artists in residence that work from our art center. And we also have education programs happening. So we have an after-school program. We do adult programming as well. So just a way to kind of bring the community together through the visual arts and talk about issues that we feel is important to explore. Yeah, and so we are closed right now because of the pandemic, but we are planning to open in mid-July, especially I think for July 11th, which is also the opening of our next show called Paint. Paint, medium as power in a time of crisis. And even though the show is called Paint, we actually have quite an array of artworks that at least involve some paint. And it's going to be a pretty amazing show. So if you can come by at some point, please do. We're going to continue to follow social distancing guidelines. And we plan to have an online system where you can sign up for a time slot to kind of reserve your spot, and you can come by and take a look at the art and know that you're going to be safe and not be in a crowd. So I think that's kind of the updates about Barrett right now. So let's turn it over to our first artist, Carl. If in case people aren't familiar with Zoom, you can just focus on him by clicking the 3 dots and pin his video, and then he will be your main video. Okay, so you can get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Carl Grauer, and I am a figurative and portrait painter from Poughkeepsie, New York. I'm going to share my screen to start so that I can do a little presentation form, and I'll do that right now. Can you see it? Okay. All right, well, welcome. As I said, my name is Carl Grauer, and I'm a portrait and figurative artist. And today I'm going to be talking about 2 topics of my work. One being the 2-hour portraits, which I have been kind of concentrating on in the last couple months during quarantine. But the second one is the Lavender Temple of Their Most Fabulous, which is the piece that I have in the Margins exhibit. So I'll be focusing on that on the second part of my presentation. So I'll just go ahead and begin. First of all, the 2-hour portraits, as you can see behind me. So this is a project that I started in 2013. And this project was born out of the basic fact that I wanted to practice and get better at portraiture. I'd started focusing on my art that year. So I was in a different field in the corporate world for a while, and I wanted to really focus on my artwork and getting better at it and practice painting portraits. So it started off as that aspect of it, and then it kind of merged into further focuses, which is like documentation and archive, and the documentation of an ongoing portrait of people that enter into my life. And also it started to document my progress as a painter. And then following that, it became more about ritual and like spending time with someone, spending a moment with someone for 2 hours where we set our phones down, we disconnected, and we were present with each other while we were having in conversation while I was painting portrait. At first, where I found inspiration in it, actually, where it kind of clued in later for me, was that back when I was in grad school, I was studying medical illustration, and I was studying at the University of Michigan, and I went to the Chicago Art Institute, where they have this artist's work, Ivan Albright. And Ivan Albright was mainly known for his portrait of Dorian Gray, which he did for the movie in the 30s. And so he was a very hyper detailed focused artist that worked a lot on decay and aging and matters of death, which I thought was, as a young person, I was very like drawn to. But there was a point in his career where he was asked to paint a self-portrait in order to be added to a collection in the National Gallery in London. And so he kind of took that on and took it on to tenfold, where he was obsessively painting self-portraits. Well, during that process, he suffered a stroke. And so he continued painting these portraits. And so in this slide, it shows like a progression of where he was when he was at kind of like at the top of his game. And then as he progressed with his disability, how that shifted as an artist. And so that really stuck with me. And so I was thinking about how, when I started these 2-hour portraits, is how interesting it would be to document not only the growth of the painter and its, but also the decline. So with this project, I'm going to continue painting this series until I no longer can. And so this screen kind of shows like a progress of my technique. And I found it really interesting. A lot of artists choose to not show their practice work, and choose to kind of either destroy it or not. And so I'm trying to be very transparent in that path, where I am showing my work from its inception, through my practice, through my growth, and then eventual decline. Here I am at a art fair doing a portrait with that last portrait you saw. So I thought that was interesting to show. Here's a small time lapse of a video that I've been doing. One of the videos that I've been doing during quarantine. And so I was very strict at the beginning about how I would paint the portrait. It always had to be from life. It always had to be a person in front of me. It always had to be someone with me. And during the time of quarantine, it really, I suffered a little bit about how am I going to do this? How am I going to continue my practice from life? And so I decided to open up that experience to a digital format, to video conferencing. And so with that, I've started painting people from March 21st onwards online with people all over the world. It's been really great. So this is a little time lapse I did of one painting. And beyond that, like it kind of started with friends, right? So like my process always started with friends. And then it would move on from there. And like this is my friend Akisha, and then this is a friend of a friend. Someone like referred it, I put it on Instagram, and then before I knew it, I was starting to paint people that I didn't know from New York who were isolating alone, who were without family, and sometimes knew someone who had COVID or knew someone who passed away. And so it was like a really far breadth reach, and I started meeting people from Paris. I started meeting people from Australia and the Philippines and all over the world, which has been really interesting for me. And before I knew it, I racked up 108 2-hour portraits since March 21st. And so I'm starting to wallpaper my studio. It's been a really thrilling experience for me, and I'm continuing to do this through the summer, and we'll see where it goes. But it's very interesting to me because during this time period, I'm being welcomed almost into people's homes, where before it was like I was inviting people into my studio and sitting, and now it's like I'm starting to build this series of work that has an environment and a connection that is far-reaching, not only globally, but also personally. So that's been really good. So that's what this project is. I'm going to move on to the next body of work that was being featured in the margins, which I'm very excited about. So a little bit about myself. I was born in Kansas in a little town called Wilson, and I always say it's in between the N and the S. It's literally in the middle of the state. And a very small town. But I want to go back to 1969, where a lot of things happened in the summer of, and including my parents met and got married. They didn't met, but they got married in the summer of 1969. Moon landing, the last episode of Star Trek, and Nixon was pledging to remove troops from Vietnam. But one particular thing that I was really focusing on is Judy Garland was found dead the morning of June 22nd in 1969, and she was in London at the time. On that same day, 3 tornadoes hit Salina, Kansas, which is miles west of my hometown, or east of my hometown. And so the tornadoes hit, 3 of them hit on 3:40 a.m. Judy Garland was found in her hotel room that same morning. And part of me thinks, or thinks that she might, when she passed away, that's when the tornadoes hit. I'm not saying that's the case, but I like to think that that's what happened. But then beyond that, 5 days later, Judy Garland's funeral happened in the Upper East Side in Manhattan. And on that same day, that evening, the Stonewall Rebellion happened. I'm not saying that anything that was causal. I just find it coincidental and interesting, especially since the kind of like the lore of Judy Garland. She's a complicated figure in many ways, but one of the things that I found very interesting was the coding that people used with Judy Garland, especially from The Wizard of Oz, where people who were queer would identify one another by saying, "Are you a friend of Dorothy?" And so if you would say, "Yes, I am a friend of Dorothy," that was a code to say, "Yes, I'm gay," or "I'm lesbian," or "I'm queer." And so I found that very, very interesting in my youth, growing up, not really having much history or learning about queer history. And so I kind of latched onto that, especially in my 20s when I started like investigating what it meant to be a queer person. And so I decided to move that into art. And I took this as an opportunity to kind of lift this like symbol and make it a symbol of hope and peace and love and self-growth. And so I built this altar piece and with the signifiers of the brain, heart, courage, and home. And on the left panel is the skyline of my hometown. And then the tornado hits through the middle of the panel, and then the right panel becomes the Emerald City in Oz. So this was kind of like the birth of my interest in, especially using 15th century Flemish religious art in order to lift the voice of people who are queer. And so that began my story, my series of the Lavender Temple. And this was a series of work that I did started last year to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Stonewall. And so I'm just going to run through some of the figures that I created for this series, which was exhibited in Hudson, New York last year in a space at Carrie Haddad Gallery. And in that space, I created a temple where people could come in and reflect upon these paintings. And so this is Karl Heinrich. And Karl Heinrich was one of the first known people to come out publicly as gay or queer. And Karl Heinrich was, of course, fired from his job as a litigator. And he was born in 1825. And so then he didn't really use the term gay or queer. He used the term earning. And earning was a term that he used to define himself as a queer man. So this is kind of like looking back at my research. I included him because of that kind of first documented sense of like coming out. This next image is of Matthew Shepard. And Matthew Shepard, of course, is a complicated figure also, especially within the queer community. But he was, the reason why I included him was because he he struck me personally, his death in 1998, because in 1998, I came out as a gay man. And during that time, his murder in Wyoming, in Laramie, Wyoming, was all over the news. It was all over everything. And it was a very brutal death where he was found covered in blood, except for the tears over his cheeks. And so I wanted to symbolize him in a way as a martyr because of that, his parents became strong activists and created the Matthew Shepard Foundation. And it led to the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act. And James Byrd Jr. was a Black man who was brutally murdered as well. And so they came together and it was signed into action by President Obama in 2009. Next is the piece that was accepted into the Margin Show. And this is a piece about Phyllis Lyon and Del Martin. And Phyllis Lyon and Del Martin are exceptional people, in my opinion. They were a lesbian couple in San Francisco in the 1950s, and they began the first organized lesbian organization, the Daughters of Bilitis. And through the Daughters of Bilitis, they really wanted to have visibility for queer people. And so they also started the first national magazine called The Ladder. And they were the first editors and writers in that magazine, and then also wrote books called The Lesbian Woman and I'm blanking on the other one, but they were also the first, Del Martin was the first woman to be included in the National Organization of Women as the first gay couple. I really want to lift up Phyllis Lyon because she just recently passed away this year. And so she was a wonderful figure for gay rights and lesbian rights and queer rights. Also to note is that they were the first couple to be legally married in 2004 in California, but then also the first couple to be married, homosexual couple to be married in California in 2008 because the first was rescinded. And so then when it became legalized in 2008, then they were also the first to be married legally in California. Next is James Baldwin. James Baldwin is really important to me as well because of his book, Giovanni's Room. And that was a book that I read in my coming out period. And it just really spoke strongly about the struggles as a homosexual man, bisexual man. And so he's a novelist, playwright, and activist who addressed inequality for African Americans, gay and bisexuals. And he was born in Harlem. Notable works were the Go Tell It on the Mountain, Notes of a Native Son, and Giovanni's Room. Next is Barbara Giddings, and Barbara Giddings is also a very strong lesbian activist, homosexual activist, and she was also an editor for The Ladder, but her contribution was very important because she doubled down on the fight towards the American Psychiatric Association, where she fought the labeling of queer people as being a mental illness. And so her activism led to the striking of that definition and eliminated that, classification of it being a mental illness. And she also picketed strong for homosexual rights for labor and especially specifically for government employees. And so, yeah, so I called her the mother of gay rights, and I love Barbara Giddings. Next is Bayard Rustin, and Bayard Rustin, of course, is a civil rights activist who was very integral in the peaceful protests, specifically the 1963 Civil Rights March, where Martin Luther King Jr. had a seminal speech about "I Have a Dream." He organized that march, but he very much took a back seat because he was openly gay. And so I find Bayard Rustin as a very important figure for civil rights. And I look up to him quite a bit. And I've met people who've known him and said he was a very kind and lovely person. So I was happy to include him into this project. Next is Harvey Milk, and Harvey Milk is celebrated for being the first openly gay politician in America, and but also martyred because when he was elected to the supervisor of San Francisco, he was brutally murdered that same year, along with Mayor Moscone. I think I'm saying that wrong, but so he quickly became martyred in the queer community, but mostly he was active in Castro Street and opened up a camera store called Castro Camera and became quite an activist within the queer community, and was mostly known as the mayor of Castro. So Harvey Milk, of course, is a very important figure. Next, I'm going through these quickly, but if you have more questions, and you can also look at this work on my website too later if you want to. So I apologize for moving quickly, but I want to get through all of them. Next is Stormy De La Verre. Stormy De La Verre is a very intriguing figure. She was a lounge singer, but also was the first drag king included in a variety show that was first fully integrated for race and gendered drag show called the Jewel Box Review. And so she was mostly known for that, but infamously in the Stonewall Rebellion, she was present and rumored to be one of the first to resist arrest at the bar. And so she was continued to be quite an activist in the queer community and was a member of the Stonewall Veterans Association. She passed away in 2014. Next is Audre Lorde, and Audre Lorde is a very important figure, specifically for lesbians and the women's rights movements, but also she was a prolific writer and was a New York poet laureate. But mostly she wrote a lot about her inclusivity of the mainstream feminist movement in the 1960s and sought to expand the feminine discourse that included the totality of a woman's identity, including race, class, gender, sexuality, but then fully formed with disability because later in life she developed breast cancer and became quite an active person for the rights of breast cancer survivors. Audre Lorde is amazing. With this painting, I incorporated the paintings of Klimt in the background, so if that looked familiar, so I kind of integrated those two things. I don't know why, I just really felt this like energy, and I love Klimt anyways, and so I can talk about that further if you have questions. Next is Gilbert Baker, and Gilbert Baker, also a person from Kansas, which I like, and in this painting you can see I highlighted the state of Kansas and on the globe where he's standing. And the reason why I put him on the globe is because he was encouraged by Harvey Milk to create a symbol of unity for the queer movement. And so Gilbert Baker created the rainbow flag, essentially. And what's interesting about that is that he did not, he didn't put a restriction on it through a trademark. So he let it be free because he thought it belonged to the whole community. And because of that, it became a symbol that has global reach, and everyone knows what the gay symbol is, the rainbow flag. And so on that, the first interpretation of it was the colors that he had meaning for, and the 8 stripes included hot pink to represent sex, red to represent life, orange to represent healing, yellow to represent sunlight, green to represent nature, turquoise to represent magic and art, and indigo to represent serenity, and violet to represent spirit. And yeah, so with that, that's a very important figure in my mind. Also a Kansas, which is awesome. Next is Larry Kramer, and Larry Kramer also passed away this year. And Larry Kramer was a huge activist and a very loud person, which brought much change, needed change, especially around AIDS rights. And so he was a founding member of ACT UP, and but also a playwright and author. And his first seminal work was called Faggots in 1978, which I think is really strong. He also co-founded the Gay Men's Health Crisis, and then also wrote the playwright The Normal Heart, which was a response to the lack of action from the government and the lack of action, quite frankly, from the queer community in response to the seriousness of this plague. Next is a diptych that I did of Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. And these figures I wanted to highlight because of their prominence in the Stonewall Rebellion. And Marsha P. Johnson, P standing for Pay It No Mind, was born in New Jersey and moved to New York in high school, but they were both active in the queer community and started an organization called STAR, which housed homeless youth who are queer, trans. And so they provided a lot of support for the local community and were very important figures as representations of the queer community and the people of color who started this whole movement essentially because of Stonewall. So I wanted to really exonerate them in a much larger piece. And so for that, I'm very grateful for both of them. And next, along that same line, a lot of my work is influenced by the Flemish painter Van der Weyden. And so I took this altar piece that he did, the Dissension of Christ, and I substituted the Deposition of Christ, sorry, the Deposition of Christ. I substituted the Christ figure with the Statue of Liberty. And these four representations of the figures from Stonewall and how they're holding liberty, essentially, liberty was in their hands and they took it upon themselves to lift it up and to fight back. And so I have symbols of the police with the police line. I have symbols of our government and our current administration where they are complacent in the movement of progress, in my opinion. And so they're having this like flyby, like the Wicked Witch of the West, Surrender Dorothy, which is representation of queer figures from the past. And it's kind of like a handing off to the future, dystopian, also, you know, optimistic future, both in one. Yeah, so that's my final piece that I wanted to share with you from this Lavender Temple. And thank you very much. And if you want more information, you can go to my website, carlgrauer.com, or you can follow me on Instagram at carlgrauer. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Carl. That was like really educational for me too, actually, to learn about a lot of these figures that I honestly didn't know much about. So thank you so much for that. So I believe Nate had some questions for you regarding your work. So I'll hand it over to him. And then after Nate, if anyone in the audience has questions too, you can write it in the chat and I can read it out loud. Or if you want to verbally ask them too, you can just raise your hand if your video is on and I can call upon you after Nate goes through some questions. Okay, so all yours, Nate.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear you talk about your work. Is really nice to hear. I was going to ask why you chose some of the figures, so I'm really glad you went over that. That was really nice to hear. You can hear me, right? Okay.
Yeah, I can, yeah.
Okay. One of the questions I had was, like, a lot of the works, like the frames seem to be like really important to the work, and so I'm kind of sad I didn't get to see some of them in person. Like, I just was wondering, like how the frame like emphasized some of the works, or what was your process through choosing it or making the frame?
That's a really great question. The frames have a very significant meaning to me, primarily because my dad helped me build those frames. So with that, like, I had this whole process where my family and I all together have had a struggle with me and my career life and accepting it and going through a whole process of finally coming to acceptance. And so with this whole process, I looked at the frames. I did a lot of research as far as like Flemish-based artwork. I went to a lot of museums. I researched frames and how they were made and or what they looked like. And so I started to design these frames that were inspired by that time period. And it was very important to me to have them handmade, to have them have a sense of a quality of not even like proficient or professional in the sense of the contemporary mindset of what a finished frame looks like, but I wanted to look like it was made in a workshop by a person. And so my dad and I worked on them together. So yeah.
Oh, great. My other question was, like, you surround these like LGBTQ plus leaders like with a lot of religious iconography, and especially since like the religion has oftentimes like criticized that community. Like, how did that shape like the works? I was just wondering what you were thinking about that.
Well, I was raised very conservative Christian. I was raised in a Baptist church where it was quite evangelical. And so there was a lot of, there's just a lot of unknown and ignorance about what it means to be queer. And so, there's a lot of hatred and a lot of stuff that are directed towards people who are queer, quite frankly. And so being that was my background, I wanted to use the same language that hurt me and hurt a lot of people who are queer, and use that visual language, that same visual language, to lift these people up and say, you know what, these people matter, they make a difference, they've saved lives. And so they are just as much entitled to sainthood and exoneration as anybody else. And so I use that visual language of Western culture, of religion, as a way to just kind of say, yes, we belong and we are valued. That's really why I kind of use that sense of language.
Yeah, I love that. It's like almost like you like transformed it into like a positive.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, it's great. Let's see. My other question was, you mentioned that you you had that all these were exhibited together, and it was like kind of like temple.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you wanted like people to like go in and kind of like reflect on these figures. I didn't know if you had anything specific that you wanted them to really like glean or like reflect on by viewing them, or just I don't know.
Well, I kind of set it up in a sense of like a memorial on some level. And like I had it set very much, it was in the back room of Carrie Haddad, and I placed it in a room where we put a velvet curtain in. We had just like kind of candles, like where you can go and say a prayer and light a candle, or a meditation and light a candle. And so within that also, I was accepting donations to the Trevor Project. So it was like, it became like a whole kind of scenario where you could come in. We had seating in the middle of the room, and it opened, the show opened on the Gay Pride in Hudson the same day. And so the parade happened, and so people came in, and it was a really wonderful moment, because when, it was like a boisterous day. People were outside, they were celebrating. It was a parade. But when people came in out of the heat into the air-conditioned room, and they walked through the hallway and came to the back room, there was a moment where people kind of calmed, and you could feel the energy shift, and people were reflective. It was a wonderful experience for me to witness. And so it was very much intention to be seen in person, seen in an installation, seen as a space where you can go and revere and learn too, because I had all the stories of each person next to each painting. So if you didn't know them, you could come in and read the story, and then you would walk away with a greater understanding, because it was celebratory but also educational, because these are all figures that are important, and they're just like a tip of the iceberg of like the number of people that have been integral into the movement. And so it's kind of like an entry point for people that if they wanted to learn more, then they could.
Awesome. Yeah. I personally definitely didn't know like some of these figures, and like it was nice to learn more about them.
Yeah. Cool.
But yeah, that was all the questions I had prepared.
Well, thank you, Nate.
Yeah.
Great
glad.
question.
Great. Yeah. Does anyone else in the audience have a question? I have one more question too, but I just want to make sure if anyone. Okay. So I had a question about all your works, including the portraits that you are currently working on. I feel like portraiture is incredibly empowering, and for a long time it was reserved for just the very wealthy or the very powerful to have their portrait painted. And now with the pandemic, you've had the chance to kind of meet people from around the world and create their portrait. What are your thoughts about accessibility in terms of getting their portrait done or being able to be seen by an artist? How is that kind of like, has doing it digitally almost like opened it up and made it more accessible for you as an artist to see more people, or for other people to like have their portrait done?
Yeah, I mean that's a really great point, because I mean, the aspect of accessibility and class and wealth being the only kind of like conduit into getting a portrait painted, and a lot of people feel like that is the only conduit still to this day. And I kind of like feel that I want to make it accessible. That's been my stance from the very beginning. It's like I want people to be able to have the ability to sit in and have a portrait painted, be able to like experience it. And so that's why with these sittings, I offer people the opportunity to sit for free. They don't have to purchase the painting. So like with that, then I get more people to come in and sit for me, but also to have that experience to be able to purchase if they want to, but they don't have to either. And so I have many degrees of availability to kind of have that portrait. Digital version, you can have that. You can have a print of it. You don't have to buy the original, but you can still have a portrait done of you by me in a way that is like, you know, serviceable to that aspect of like accessibility. Because, you know, it's all about equity and access with anything, with systemic problems, with culture or class or economy. And so I think portraits are the bomb. I love them. I love portraits. They're everything to me. I could do it every moment, every day for the rest of my life, which I'm going to. But yeah, so I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. And thank you, like as an artist, like to donate your time, which I'm sure like during this time it's really hard for a lot of creative people to make a living. So the fact that you're still giving is really amazing. Thank you so much for your presentation and your time and sharing your work with us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to the Barrett House and everyone for inviting me along and accepting my work into the show. It meant a lot to me, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So if there are no more questions, which I don't see any in the chat right now, let's move on to our second artist, Molly Haig. And did I pronounce your name right? I'm so sorry.
Yeah, good.
Okay, great. Yeah, so if you'd like to, if everyone needs to pin her, just click the 3 dots and you can pin her video, and you can feel free to start when you're ready.
Great. I also have a presentation, so I'm going to share my screen. Can you all see that? Great. So my name is Molly. I'm a visual artist and graphic designer. I'm from Ann Arbor, Michigan originally, sort of based in Brooklyn, in Vermont for the foreseeable future. I'm very interested in language and text and literacy and how we learn to absorb language. And I've explored those things as a psychology major in my undergrad, as a literacy tutor in Boston Public Schools, and as an MFA graphic design student. And I have a dance background, so I'm also interested in movement and bodies and patterns. And those two lines of inquiry come together in kind of an exciting way in this project that I get to talk about today. So I'm going to talk about this 5-minute video, which is in the Barrett Art Gallery online right now. I'm not going to show the video, but just for context, this is a like top-down video of a pair of hands, my hands basically destroying this book of paper and textures and text, but it gets destroyed in such a way that it reveals every line of a poem. And this poem is by Gertrude Stein. It's called A Little Called Pauline, and it's an excerpt from Tender Buttons, published in 1914. So this is language that's over 100 years old, but I'm excited to talk about it because I think there are some things about it that are really relevant to right now specifically. This project is fun for me to talk about because it involved a lot of trial and error and just testing things out to figure out what form this could even take. So there are 4 aspects of it that I want to talk through with you. The first one is just Gertrude Stein's language. This is kind of a crazy pile of text and words. And if we were together in person, I would hand you a sheet of paper and ask you to take 5 minutes and just absorb it for yourself. Since that's not our situation, I have just excerpted a few short quotes of it for you to look at and get a sense of what's going on here or what isn't going on. So this is the first one. And here's the second one. And one more. So what is going on here? The question mark is mine. Gertrude Stein didn't use them. She also didn't use grammar and language in meaning in quite the way that we're used to, which makes the text particularly, I think, difficult to access, but also fun to dig into. So the way that I first started digging into it was just pasting it in a Microsoft Word document and color coding everything that repeated. And I was just looking for combinations of letters that repeated, combinations of words, phrases. So this felt like it gave me sort of a point of entry to at least be noticing something about this language. I also started to ask the more conceptual question, like what themes repeat, what is this about? And maybe because I'm a graphic designer, but I started noticing language that was related to typography and printing. And I've highlighted some of those words here. Come and say what prints all day. That last line of the poem, jam it not, I associated with jammed printers. I also started noticing language that was a little bit harder to classify, but it made me think of the headlines in the magazines that you walk by in the checkout line at the grocery store. So this is language that is just a little past the truth, a little bit exaggerated. And so I started putting these 2 understandings of the poem together to conceptualize it as this critique of the media, sort of exposing what prints all day as sometimes being exaggerated, sometimes being not quite true. And sort of in this pile of language, inviting us to dig through that a little bit and think about what's going on. But this is still a poem, it's a pile of words. I hadn't made anything out of it yet. So I started to think about what needs to happen to this to make it into a form that's accessible in a different way. I made a lot of prototypes. This one was not successful as a final version of the project, but it helped me think through what I wanted to do in terms of aligning certain bits of the poem with other bits of the poem. Like you can see in the left picture, I had that one ing that I was trying to make line up with lots of different words that ended in ing. So as I said, this is messy. It didn't work, but it led me to my next idea, which worked a lot more smoothly because I realized that the folds weren't adding anything. It didn't need to be accordion pleated. It could be flat sheets of paper. So I started out testing a similar idea with sheets of paper that could align to build up lines of the poem in different ways. A little called Anything Shows Shutters. And I was pretty happy with this solution, but it was still missing a lot of things that needed to be thought through for this to be a cohesive project. One of these things was the typography. This is a test sheet that I printed out to think about whether this needed to be black and white, colors. I was interested in using display type inspired by newspaper headlines and magazine covers. I also put a lot of thought into the paper, and you saw my prototype was this like bright blue and purple and green colors, and I like those colors, but they didn't seem appropriate for this language and this project. I get really excited about going to use bookstores, finding things in attics, and like discovering old paper, and it elicits this feeling of mystery and discovery for me. So I wanted to elicit that kind of feeling with this paper and these textures of maybe like faded, crinkled, used paper. So this is the final cocktail of paper textures that I ended up with. I also just technically had to think about how to hold it together. This is another prototype, because my vision for this animation is that this thing needed to be destroyed, but it needed to hold together well enough that it wouldn't all just fall apart. So this is perfect bound on both edges. That's what the gluey stuff is. And here is the final book. The next thing that needed to happen, I'm calling choreography because it's the movements that the hands needed to make in order for this to come to life, to become a motion project. And this part was actually really scary because, to go back a slide, this is not something that you can like start cutting up and start filming and then mess up and go back and fix it and start again. This is a one-time deal. So I planned this choreography out really carefully. I had all these diagrams that I had pulled up on my computer as I was filming to look at what word would come next. I coded it so that the next word was always in black, so I knew where to cut or rip. So these are some of my sketches. And then here are the outcomes. These are freeze frames from the video that came from those sketches. And you'll notice they don't look exactly the same because, well, I thought it was important to reveal the words in the right place, in the right order. I wanted there to be some element of chance. So the rips and the scraps and things, I think that bit of chaos is a little bit more true to the essence of the poem, to the feeling of those words. I made a total mess. This is what it looked like when I'd ripped to the bottom of this book. And you can see my setup on the left here. I had a camera facing downward. I had my laptop pulled up so I could see my choreographic instructions. And then under the camera had been this book that I systematically ripped apart. And there's one last thing that I want to share about this project. And I'm calling it secrets because part of what draws me to this kind of language is that I don't know if I understand it. Like there might be things that I find in it later if I reread it again. There might be something you could convince me this poem is really about if you had a different analysis of it. And I think it's really powerful to have language that makes us feel that way, that makes us feel like there could be more, or just kind of makes us question our own perception. So I wanted this project not only to reproduce the words, but to elicit that feeling of like, maybe there's more, maybe I could look further. And one way that I did that was that in order to get that sort of paper texture look that I wanted, I had also inserted bits of a present day New York Times newspaper. And the secret is that I paired a lot of those with language from Gertrude Stein that I thought resonated with the newspaper clip somehow. So I think you can enjoy this project without nitpicking it to that degree, but if you wanted to, you would notice that some of the newspaper clippings correspond to the words. So shoes, wide soles sounds a lot like shoes, which also have soles, and it's placed over a picture of shoes. Noon and moon and moon I paired with like lunar charts and tide projections from the newspaper. I thought that was a fun connection. A letter went with the opinion section, letter to the editor. It actually says letter on that newspaper clip. And there are more, but I will leave you to imagine or find them for yourself. I do want to say that one of my goals with this project is to make viewers feel invited and included in this kind of opaque, inscrutable language. I think we have some like mental barriers that go up when we think about poetry specifically, but also when we think about language that doesn't confirm what we already believe. And I think it's really important to feel empowered and feel invited to take it apart and think about what we are putting out in the world and think about what we're learning, and not be afraid to like literally or figuratively dig deeper. That is all. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Molly. That was incredible. And I think I still had so much to understand about your process. So that was really helpful for me, and amazing, like how time consuming, and you get one shot to kind of get this video done. That's very daunting. So that's really cool. So again, I'm gonna hand it over to Nate so he can ask some of the questions that he's prepared for you. And again, anyone else who's here today, if you'd like to ask a question, you can type it into the chat or raise your hand, and then I'll call on you. Okay, so Nate, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, you answered some of my stuff. I was really wondering about your choice of typeface. I know you mentioned about it being related to like newspaper headlines, but I didn't know if you had anything more to add about that.
Yeah, so I wanted to pick out one typeface that would be sort of a calmer base typeface so that this wouldn't all be crazy. So that one's it's a little bit typewriter-esque. It's called Letter Gothic, and that's what the smaller type is in. And then paired with that, I wanted to add display typefaces that would sort of call to mind newspaper headlines and like big political signs and magazine titles. So that's what that combination of things came from.
Yeah, and then also like I feel like there's like certain words that you emphasize. Like I think like cow gets emphasized, and like at the end it's like more. I didn't know if there was any like reason or like choice there.
Yeah, sometimes I emphasized things that just sounded like they needed to be emphasized. Like, I hope she has her cow is such a bold, strange statement that seemed like it should be a big sign. Other times I emphasized things that would sort of promote an intentional misreading, because I think part of what's interesting about Stein's language is that it kind of invites you to misunderstand it and find other readings in the words that like rhyme or sound almost like something but aren't something. So for example, there's a line that says a little lace, and I know that Gertrude Stein's life partner, lover, was named Alice, and she sometimes like sandwiches that name sneakily into her text. So I made A and lace really big because it sounds like Alice, and then little was smaller in between it. So some of the choices are to like help you misunderstand it in an interesting way.
Oh, nice. One of the other things I really love about the work is like almost like the background noises, like the like birds, and like it's almost like, I hesitate to say like ASMR like quality, but like it's almost there. But I didn't know like why like you chose some of those noises, or just some curiosity there.
Yeah, a few other people have compared this to ASMR too. I think that's not what I had in mind when I made it, but also I'm really drawn to just like papers and textures, and so this like represents something that seems beautiful and fun to me. Um, the bird noises, I actually did add in bird noises, and it's because I made an earlier version of this project where it was a little bit glitchy, so when I sped it up, it made sort of tweeting outdoor bird noises, and I actually really liked that layer of atmosphere as something to sort of put this in a place. And so then when I made the final version of the project, it kind of felt like it was missing that just sort of outdoor, like placing this in some kind of environment. So I added in some bird sounds, and I also had a recorder right by my hands to get the best ripping noises that I could.
Yeah, I mean, I love that part. But my other question for you was, how do you think like the way you cut through the book and or peel the pages helps us think more critically about the poem, or just like the media that we consume in our lives at large?
Mm. Well, it's kind of a metaphor for actually how I absorbed that poem. So I really felt like mentally I was cutting it up, and you can see that kind of in my like in the Word document where I was color coding things, like I was categorizing it all in my head. And that's one way that it helps for me to take apart language, but I don't think that's how everyone thinks about language. So I wanted to share that experience of the poem somehow, and like very literally cutting it seemed like a good way to like make that a real experience that you could watch. And then the second part of that question was about how it aligned with like being critical of the media. And you can think of that as a metaphor for being critical of the media too. Like, how do you cut apart what those words really mean, or what you might be missing in them?
Yeah. Yeah, I love it because I feel like a lot of times when you read a poem, you like go through it very fast, but like the way you like cut through, it's like you have to like focus on the words themselves. It's just, I don't know, it was really nice. But yeah, those are the questions I had for you. Thanks for talking
Yeah,
about
good questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nate, for those questions. So I'm gonna turn it over, see if anyone else has a question. If not, I also have one more question. So I really liked seeing your progress, like your early trials of what you wanted to do with the accordion folds, and then seeing it evolve. Do you kind of see maybe in the future possibly doing another format of this, or a different way to explore Stein's works, or maybe do something similar but to another piece that she's written? I'm just curious, like, where do you see yourself going from here?
Yeah, I've wondered if I should do something else based on this too. I haven't like I don't have specific plans to do more with Stein, but I always get really excited about it. And usually my projects start from like a piece of language or a concept or something. So I think if I find another bit of her language that speaks to me, I would definitely make something out of it. This solution, it was very specific to this bit of language because I found the like typographical references, and it seemed to me to be about the media and newspaper. So if I made something else out of some of her language, it would probably look very different. But I do think that the like ripping and revealing the repetition is something that could work for other bits of language by Gertrude Stein, because there's a lot of like repetition and overlap and things.
I
Very
do have
cool.
one more question, actually, if you don't
Yeah.
mind. how sad were you when you actually tore through the whole book?
I was really, I was really sad because I really liked it as this object. I thought it was a cool object to have this book that was full of information that you couldn't access and you couldn't open. I think that's really interesting. I did also print out another version that I have as a book that I didn't perfect bind,
Oh.
just in case I really terribly messed up this one. But yeah, it was scary to cut it up, and I felt kind of sad because I really liked it.
Yeah.
It is beautiful, like just as that object, and then your video too. Okay, so were there any other questions from anyone? No? Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Molly, for sharing. Okay, so I just got a question about where the show is hosted, and yeah, so our current show that Carl and Molly are in is only virtual because of the pandemic. So you can find it at barrettartcenter.org. So I'm gonna actually just type in our link too, so you can check it out. I can't talk and type at the same time, but so I will type in that link and you can find it there. But fortunately, since we're moving into phase 4, which is when cultural organizations can open again, the next show will be physical, and you can come to our next show, which is Paint, Medium as Power in a Time of Crisis, and that opens July 11th. And yeah, and I think during that time we still won't be able to do real life artist talks, but we hope to do something similar to this again, which I think was very enlightening. I learned so much today, so I hope everyone else also enjoyed it as much as I did. Again, Molly, thank you so much for your time, and Carl, thank you so much. Yeah, I definitely learned a lot. So, okay, so I'm just gonna do the link.
Thank you so much for answering all the questions. Appreciate
Yeah,
Thank
definitely.
you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Okay, so I'm just gonna add the link real quick, and then yeah, thank you everyone for attending today, and I hope to see everyone soon, hopefully in real life. Just check out our website for any updates regarding our opening. Okay, so everyone have a beautiful Saturday afternoon.
Thank you. Be well.